Hi, everyone. So excited you're joining us right now. We are here for Author Talks Live. So, very, very excited to have my next guest here, Susan McPherson, who is, for those of you who are not familiar with Susan, she is a serial connector, a friend, and she is the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies based out of New York. And she advises brands on lots of social good initiatives around including brands like Intel and Tiffany's and so many more. And I am so thrilled that I have actually got a copy of her book, and I asked her if she would please come talk about it in our wonderful Author Talks live series to really introduce so many people to how awesome her thoughts are on how do we connect. And the book is called The Lost Art of Connecting. And I'm going to stop talking and start asking Susan all kinds of questions. So welcome, Susan.
What a joy and honor to be here with you today, Kara. And it's so good to see you.
So good. Susan asked me to interview her a couple of weeks ago. So this is my second round of interviewing Susan. So I'm very, very thrilled. But let's talk first about the phrase, how can I help? You talk about this in your book. Why is that a question that's such a game changer for so many people who are interested in actually connecting?
Certainly. Great question. And I will tell you that years ago, I may not look it here on the screen, but I'm tiny. My license says I'm 5 foot. And in the early 90s, when I was coming of age professionally and I would walk into rooms, no one would see me. And I learned very quickly that if in my conversations with others, I made it the little bit more about them than me, they would actually engage with me, even though it might have been painful for them to have to look down and potentially cause back issues. But in learning that art of kind of meaningful conversation, I found if I led with, how can I be helpful? It would continue the relationship to a deeper level. And when we are taught the kind of proverbial networking, much of it is around the give me culture, right? Get business cards, one to many, meet as many people as you can. And then you go to the obligatory LinkedIn and make connections, and then nothing ever happens. But when you lead with, how can I be helpful? There's actually a reciprocity that occurs. And
I
it's
totally agree.
not helping yourself first. I am not suggesting that. What I am recommending is if you lead with, how can I help? You actually are helping yourself.
I totally agree. And I think, frankly, it can happen at any level. So if you're a, recent college or upcoming college grad, and maybe you're interning, just being that person who says that sentence, how can I be helpful? Don't you agree at any level? I mean, you're like, whoa, that person is a giver, right? That person wants to connect in some way.
Yes, but I think for our audience, if you're fresh out of college and or maybe even approaching retirement, I think sometimes we think, oh, what do we have to offer, right?
Mhm.
But every single person has a chief differentiating factor or secret sauce or superpower. And we were talking before the broadcast today specifically about TikTok. So sometimes I say to the 22-year-olds when they say to me, "What? How can I be helpful?" I say two words: TikTok. So I think you get what I'm saying. Every single one of us has something to give and something to offer.
So obviously we've all been in, the 12, or I don't know, I've lost count of how many months it is. Let's just call it a year of remote work for most people. How do you think connecting is different or can be maintained, because you don't have those conversations, with the person sitting next to you in a desk or at the espresso machine or at the restroom where you say, here's what's going on, and how can I be helpful? How do you think that shifts?
Well, what you're talking about is the proverbial water cooler moments, right?
Mhm.
Well, first of all, this past year, I think there are many lessons learned, and there are some silver linings. Not many, but there are some. And one of the top ones, I believe, is that we will never, ever uh, not relish and value meaningful connecting, right? Because it's been challenging, and we have had to be much more intentional. But I think what we have done with all these FaceTimes and Zoom conversations and Microsoft Teams meetings, we have learned to be very intentional with, for instance, the chat on the side, where you could actually reach out to a colleague who maybe you haven't seen in real life in a while, but you could say, gee, Tom, gee, Lori, this has been a tough year. How are you doing? Is there anything I can be helpful to you with? And we couldn't do that when we were in real meetings, right? Like when we'd be sitting in an office
Yeah.
meeting, because you'd kind of get in trouble if you were having side conversations. So I also think many of us have, during this very painful time, have reached out to people that perhaps we haven't been in touch with. And how many of us have, I mean, most of us, I guess all of us have had a birthday. And how many times in those birthdays have people actually shown up who weren't geographically close by, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally.
and I realize that's kind of a silly example, but it's meaningful, right? So I think
Absolutely.
head back into some sense of normalcy. And I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you exactly what that is, but I think we're going to hold on to that. And I honestly think when we are having conversations with people, we're not going to be looking at our phone, looking down and being like, yeah, we're actually going to be listening to one another.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And just to the audience, don't forget to, if you have any questions, get those ready. We'll be coming back to you in just a couple of minutes. So if you have anything for Susan, but yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing, you actually did this to me the other day. You texted me. In fact, back up, I just wrote an article about this to my subscribers that talked about, the different ways of communicating and how the Gen Z audience in particular, that's what they live in, right? They live in texting. And how do you have better communication that way? So you texted me the other day and just told me how important I am in your life. And, it was just, I mean, random kind of really kind thoughts like that just go a long way for people. And, just saying, how can I be helpful? I think it's just, even if people don't really have anything, or, they think, oh, Susan's awesome, right? She really is there if I really need her. And I just think it's a reminder that you can do it at any level and at any time. It doesn't, even if you haven't talked to somebody for 6 months, it's definitely something that I think is definitely doable. So you've talked about the next few months being, critical for us. And as we start to, roll into either our existing job, or maybe some of us are actually thinking about a new career, you call it your do-over opportunity. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Of course. Well, I liken to what we are in right now is almost purgatory, right? We've got one toe out the door, but we can't quite get there. And for those of us who live in like cities where we're in apartment buildings, I almost say it's kind of like, when your neighbor orders, something really aromatic like Indian food or Thai food, and you can smell it, but you don't get to eat it. That's a little bit like what we're in right now. But
Yeah.
this is an opportunity of a lifetime. We have a do-over opportunity. We can be very intentional right now to be mindful of the community we want to build around us that is going to help us get to the goals we want to reach, whether it's a new job, a promotion, fundraising for our startup, joining a nonprofit or a for-profit board. It is the time in the next couple of months to think about, how am I going to go ahead and build that community? Where am I going to start? And what can I personally bring to the table so that I can be helpful to that community?
Absolutely. Well, and I think one thing I want to emphasize that I I thought about a lot when I was reading your book is, it's not just about one way, or I should say, two-way connections where you and I are having a connection. But I think it's also really important for people to kind of bring your authentic self and sort of say, here are the couple of challenges that I have going on. If I, for example, wanted to figure out how to do TikTok, or, if I wanted to figure out, how to build a customer service center. I mean, don't have five of those things, but have a couple of those things saying, hey, here's something that I have. Susan, do you know anybody who has built like a customer service center? Whatever, you may not, but I think also because you're willing to connect and you're willing to be helpful, I feel like there are connections out there that maybe your connections, your top level connections may have.
Well, interestingly enough, I'm often asked, how do you, isn't this time consuming? You're always introducing people and connecting people. And I joke that over 35 years of doing this, my filing cabinet of people is so rich and deep that it actually makes me more efficient. And, what Kara just said is, if someone comes to me and says, do you know a climatologist, or do you know an auto mechanic, or whatever, generally we know those people. And if we don't, we know someone who does, right? So it's not me doing all the helping and fixing. It's actually having a beautiful, meaningful, rich community from which to tap into.
I totally agree. So we're going to open it up for questions. And let's see.
There's so many.
I know, right? Let's see. I've got my glasses on here. Lots of really good ones. We've got, do you think people will appreciate their connections after COVID?
Well, Megan, thank you for that question. You're talking to an eternal optimist, so please take it take it for what it's worth. But I absolutely do. And as somebody, I have been alone for 13 months. You can probably tell just in this short 10 minutes, I am not an introvert. So I have to say it has been very challenging. I don't have parents, I don't have children, I don't have a significant other. I can tell you, I am never going to take any connection for granted ever again. Now, that's me, but I think all of us have experienced some sense of grief and loss during this past year. Obviously, some way more than others. But I do think we are going to appreciate our connections more.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody was asking me this question the other day that I think is really relevant for this conversation. That, do you believe that the connections that happen in the business world need to actually extend outside to your personal life?
Yeah. I don't know if it's a question of need. What I can tell you from my personal experience, about 15 years ago, I stopped being work Susan and home Susan because, quite frankly, it was exhausting being two people.
Yeah, I agree.
And professionally, if I opened myself up, not to the point of, sharing my dirty laundry kind of thing, but if I was more vulnerable about who I was, generally speaking, my colleagues were as well. And then we were able to connect on a deeper level and actually be more productive.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have a couple of more great questions here. I'm just starting out and I don't have much of a network. Where is a good place to start? That's Abby.
Abby, that is a great question, and you are not alone. First of all, I would look actually really close to home. Your family members, your cousins, your second cousins, your third cousins, your neighbors. I would also suggest volunteering, getting involved in a local nonprofit, because that will help you meet people who are not just like you, and people who come from a different part of a livelihood. Because it's really important for us to be kind of pushing the boundaries of the the people that look and sound and I was going to say in taste, but that's wrong. But that are just like us. So I think initially start with your community, and it is completely appropriate to ask people for introductions, but please lead with the mantra, what can you be doing to be helpful to others, rather than what can you get from them?
Absolutely. So Alexandra has a really great question. Let's see. Sometimes people want a connection intro to someone I may know that is really scarce on time or in a leadership role, or I don't feel comfortable making that connection. How do you say no in that situation, without alienating yourself from your one-on-one connection with this person?
Well, first of all, Alexandra, I always do a second opt-in. I always would ask the person first. And I know you're leading with the assumption that the person is too busy and doesn't want to meet the person, but I would beg to differ and say it's worth asking the person if you might be able to make the introduction. Because generally speaking, people want to be helpful, even if
Mhm.
we're busy. But I think the respectable thing to do is to go ahead and ask the person. If the person says no, then you have every right to go back to the other person asking you and say, you went ahead and made the ask. Unfortunately, at this point in time, she isn't able to meet with you, but perhaps there's someone else I might be able to introduce you to that could be helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we've got time for one more quick question. This is from
Dan.
Dan. Yeah. So has the COVID shift to virtual connections, business and personal meetings and customer engagement replaced to a great percentage in-person face-to-face meetings? By the way, love the comment on using Zoom chat to establish deeper connections as well. I have found that to be extremely effective. Yeah, the one thing I want to say about Zoom that I actually said in a different context at the beginning of this crazy year that we've been through is that if you think about Zoom as a roadblock, then you're never going to be able to do anything. Instead, it's a tool, right? It's
It
a
is.
platform, and figure out how to use it. And that's all it is. So it's but let's go back to this question. What the question that Dan just asked, has the COVID shift to virtual connections, business and personal meetings and customer engagement replaced to a greater percentage in-person, face-to-face long term?
I think, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we're going to see hybrid situations going forward, which I think may be a good thing, right? I mean, we don't have to be getting on a plane to fly, for an hour meeting in Dubai, and, like add the carbon footprint anymore. I think we can be more efficient that way, but I also believe we know that in-person meetings where we can actually make real eye contact and see each other's body languages are vitally important for team productivity. So I think it's going to be a combination, at least for the next couple of years.
I totally agree. So Susan, such a good book. I really, really encourage everybody to grab a copy. The Lost Art of Connecting. Susan McPherson. Thank you so much, Susan, for coming on. And where do people find you on social?
Susan McP1, anywhere and everywhere. And the book can be found at thelostartofconnecting.com or at bookstores everywhere.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We're just at least once a week. We just got started and we're having so much fun with it. And just quick snippets, 20 minutes of having people, great books that I've read and people I enjoy, and great thoughts. So definitely stay tuned for many, many, many more great ones. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.